So, my key scripture for this evening will be verse 10, and I'll be reading from the NIV. Verse 10 says, "And after Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before." Now, my topic for this evening is Friends, Part 2. Which one are you? I want to start off by giving a shout out to my auntie and to address a question that few have asked. Part 2, where was Part 1? Well, a few years ago, sitting in front of a laptop in the hallway of my home, I delivered a message also entitled Friends. My last sermon was about the paralyzed man and his friends, referencing Luke chapter 5. The next day, I received a text message from my aunt asking if there was going to be a Friends series. My answer? No. She follows up, and my answer is again, no. Well, joke's on me, because here I am 4 years later, delivering part 2. And God is really something when it comes to timing, because when the sermon schedule went out in December of last year, and I saw my name, I didn't have a fraction of a clue what I could speak about. I remember telling God, well, you're going to have to show me something, because I don't even know where to begin. But with God being God, it didn't take any longer than about 2 weeks for him to come through. Our church has been reading through the Bible in chronological order, and at that time, we were reading through the book of Job. I remember listening to the audio while at work and having really strong feelings about what was going on as I was listening. At one point, I remember actually feeling exhausted from listening to all of this and wanting to skip the rest of the book because I already knew how it ended. Job pressed through and eventually gave him back more than he lost. Yay, great lesson to be learned by all. On to the next one. No. God said, no, you're going to keep listening, and so I did, reluctant attitude and all. And then one morning, as I'm listening, I heard one phrase that completely stopped me in my tracks. And God said, there it is. There's part 2. So bang, in one moment, I had my text and my title. And while I thought this message would only share the same title as my previous one, I was blown away by God as he intricately revealed ways in which the two texts actually connect. To give a short recap of the text found in Luke, Jesus was in town teaching and healing people. A group of men showed up carrying their paralyzed friend on a bed, hoping to see Jesus, but the crowd was too big for them to get all the way through. So they carried him up on the roof of the house where Jesus was and lowered him down, and Jesus healed the man. Now, to do a quick compare and contrast, I want to highlight one difference and one similarity between the two. The difference is very obvious. The account of the paralyzed man is in the New Testament, and the text for tonight is found in the Old Testament. This immediately sets up a bit of context, knowing that in the Old Testament, people were living under law, and in the New Testament and up to today, we are living under grace. Now, that's the difference, but look at the similarity, the number 5. There is the paralyzed man and his 4 friends, 5 in total, and here we have Job and his 4 friends, 5 in total. This revelation prompted me to dig a little deeper, and what I found blew me away. BibleStudy.org says the number 5 many times symbolizes God's grace, goodness, and favor towards humans. It also goes on to say the English word 5 used for the number 5 is recorded 345 times in 270 King James Bible verses. 300 of these appearances show up in the Old Testament, while 45 of them are written in the New Testament. What God was showing me was that although in the Old Testament they were under law, grace was highly present. Look at the numbers. Now let's take a look at how grace would abound in this Old Testament account as we deal with the following 3 points. Point 1, the one where they're silent. Point 2, the one where they speak. And point 3, the one where God speaks. Point 1, the one where they're silent. By the time that we are introduced to Job's friends, Job has already lost majority of his family, his possessions, and is in constant physical pain from head to toe. Job chapter 2, verses 11 through 13, and I will be reading from the NIV version. When Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamathite heard about all the troubles that had come upon him. They set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him, because they saw how great his suffering was. Now, this sounds like some really great friends. Scripture says that the friends tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. In my research, I learned that in Job's day, this act symbolized intense emotional sadness and grief. When Job's friends saw the state he was in, they grieved with him and sat with him in silence, in solidarity, in unity. However, the silence wouldn't last. Things quickly take a turn when the silence gets broken, which leads me to point 2, the one where they speak. Dialogue begins to take place between Job and his friends. Now, considering how back in chapter 2, it says that they agreed to go and comfort Job, you'd think that the dialogue would be comforting. However, you don't have to read too far ahead to see that this would not be the case. And while I fully believe that the friends had nothing but the best of intentions, their need to pinpoint the why of the situation presented continuous friction rather than a solution. Now, God had to keep reminding me that they were living under law and that they could only comprehend situations based on what they knew. And what they knew was that God punishes those who dishonor him. So their coming conclusion was that Job clearly had to have done something wrong or displeasing and to God, and this was the consequence. Now, have you ever been in a situation like this before, where you're going through a difficult season, answers are few and far between, you know that you've done everything correctly, yet nothing changes, and then here comes someone with their self-proclaimed wisdom who clearly knows more about you and your situation than you do? I've experienced that a lot while dealing with chronic illness. Although I have been fighting for years, the reality is that there are still many questions that remain unanswered. Yet I've had people, some who know very little about my story, confidently tell me that I just need to do this, or you just need to try that. And it's frustrating, especially when their advice is to do something that you've already been doing. Now back to the text. Job's friends are all trying to justify these punishments when the reality is Job actually wasn't being punished at all. In the first chapter of the book, the man is described as blameless, upright, and the greatest man among all the people of the East. Now, does this sound like someone that needs to be punished? No. Now, imagine how this must have felt for Job, knowing that he hasn't wronged God, but hearing his friends reiterate their conclusion that he had to have done something wrong. He was basically being gaslit by his friends. And honestly, like I said, God had to walk with me through this gently because I was getting upset. Now, I'm going to quickly go through some of just the beginning portion of the conversation between Job and his friends. Bear with me. Job spoke first. He curses the day that he was born. Understandable given the circumstances. Man's has pretty much lost everything except a few servants and a wife that ain't no help. So Eliphaz responds first. In chapter 4, verses 7 and 8, he says, "Consider now, who being innocent has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed? As I have observed, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it." Then jump down to chapter 5, because he's still talking. Verses 3 and 4, he says, "I myself have seen a fool taken root. Have you now? But suddenly his house was cursed. His children are far from safety, crushed in court without a defender." Then verses 8 and 9 say, "But if I were you, I would appeal to God. I would lay my cause before him. He performs wonders that cannot be fathomed, miracles that cannot be counted." This is how you sympathize and comfort your friend? Okay. So Job responds in chapter 6 and 7, and then the next friend, Bildad, speaks. Chapter 8, verses 3 through 7. He asks, "Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right? When your children sinned against him, he gave them over to the penalty of their sins. Pause. Hold up. Hold up. This was messed up on multiple levels. Because you're accusing Job's children of unrepented sin, which, speaking of someone's deceased children anyway, is disrespectful in and of itself. And you're being dismissive of the fact that Job would make sacrifices on behalf of his children on a regular. Quick jump back to chapter 1, verses 4 and 5 say his sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays, and they would invite their sisters to eat and drink with them. When the period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular custom. So, Bildad, you're either accusing God of ignoring Job's sacrifices, or you're dismissing them altogether. Okay, back to Bildad, verses 5 through 7. He says, but if you will seek God earnestly and plead with the Almighty, you think he ain't been doing that? If you are pure and upright, which he is, even now he will rouse himself on your behalf and restore you to your prosperous state. Your beginnings will seem humble, so prosperous will your future be. Do you even know Job at this point? Okay. Now, I know I skipped over Job's first response after Eliphaz spoke, but I'm going to take my time here because what God showed me was very eye-opening, and it gave me a deeper understanding of what it was like living under law. Like I said, God had to keep reminding me, and what Job says in his response was really something. He asks, but how can mere mortals prove their innocence before God? This is in chapter 9, verse 2. He continues on acknowledging the vastness of who God is, but that he doesn't deserve to approach him. And I'm reading, and I'm like, no, Job, you can approach him. You can talk to him. He loves you. You can. And I'm getting upset again because I'm thinking Job is missing it. And then God tells me, no, remember, they're under law. He doesn't know what you know. And then the scripture confirmed it, because listen to what Job says in verses 32 and 33. He is not a mere mortal like me that I might answer him, that we may confront each other in court. If only there was someone to mediate between us, someone to bring us together. So he wasn't missing it. The mediator hadn't come yet. This wasn't some dramatic expression of modesty. This was an image of the reality. If you tried to approach God and you were wrong, that could have been it. You could have been dead on the spot. The mediator had not come yet. God said, see, he doesn't know what you know. He was strategic because he knew I'd need to have a deeper level of compassion to get me through the rest of this conversation. So Job says all of that, and then he begins to more or less complain about, what he's going through, but he directs his complaints to God. Then the third friend opens his mouth. Chapter 11, verses 1 through 6. Then Zophar the Naamathite replies, are all these words to go unanswered? Is this talker to be vindicated? Will your idle talk reduce others to silence? Will no one rebuke you when you mock? You say to God, my beliefs are flawless and I am pure in your sight. Pause. Do you see the irony here? This man is saying no one will no one rebuke when you mock, and then proceeds to mock him. What type of friend? Verse 4 again. You say to God, my beliefs are flawless and I am pure in your sight. Oh, how I wish that God would speak, that he would open his lips against you. Oh, you do you? Okay. Verse 6, and disclose to you the secrets of wisdom, for true wisdom has two sides. Know this, God has even forgotten some of your sin. Everybody go home. All of y'all go home. Conversation over. We're done. These are basically the opening statements, just snippets from the friends that are supposed to be comforting him. But the conversation continues, and at this point, Job claps back, more or less, by reminding them that he is just as wise and knowledgeable about God as they were. Like, hello, stop telling me what I already know. he goes on to call them worthless physicians and basically tells them to be quiet. So now I'm perked up. Job found his fight. Chapter 13 is doing something for me, and we get down to verse 15. He gives us that timeless scripture, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. And I'm like, bang, there you go, Job. You ain't got to say nothing else. That's it. We can end the conversation right here. But no, they kept talking and talking. And the dialogue between these men continued all the way up to chapter 31. And once again, God had to deal with me gently because Kayla thinks they talk too much and that this conversation could have been done back in the middle of chapter 13. However, Kayla's not God. So here we are in chapter 32, and there's another friend named Elihu on the scene. Now, it doesn't specifically note when he joined the conversation, but it can be deduced that he was present for a good portion of it. Job 32, verses 1 through 12. So these three men stopped answering Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. But Elihu, son of Barachel the Buzite of the family of Ram, became very angry with Job for justifying himself rather than God. He was also angry with the three friends because they had found no way to refute Job and yet had condemned him. Now Elihu had waited before speaking to Job because they were older than he. But when he saw that the three men had nothing more to say, his anger was aroused. So Elihu, son of Barachel the Buzite, said, I am young in years, and you are old. That is why I was fearful, not daring to tell you what I know. I thought, age should speak. Advanced years should teach wisdom. But it is the spirit in a person, the breath of the Almighty that gives them understanding. It is not only the old who are wise, not only the aged who understand what is right. Therefore I say, listen to me. I too will tell you what I know. I waited while you spoke. I listened to your reasoning. While you were searching for words, I gave you my full attention. But none of you have proved Job wrong. None of you has answered his arguments. I like this friend. He is not afraid of rebuking Job because at this point, he's grumbling and justifying himself so much that he's making his affliction an idol. And he's not afraid to tell this group of older and should-be wiser men that with everything they've said, they ain't really said nothing. Now, Pastor, when we spoke, you mentioned that you viewed Elihu as a prefigment of Jesus, but I actually see him more as a prefigment of John the Baptist, being the younger of the group and yet actually having the most wisdom and being willing to speak the truth. But also, God gave this to me this afternoon, the way John the Baptist was the forerunner of Jesus, Elihu in this conversation is the forerunner of God. Because after he says all he has to say, next to speak is God. Point 3, the one where God speaks. After Elihu gets done addressing pretty much everything for 6 chapters, the big man upstairs chimes in. And just like Elihu did, he addresses Job first. He says to Job, brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you will answer me. And God goes in. I urge you to read this portion starting from chapter 38 when you have the time, because, boy, God goes in on him. Whew. And then when it's Job's turn to reply in chapter 40, verses 3 to 4, then Job answered the Lord, I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more. Now, Job, honey, sweetie, I know you're tired. It's been a long couple of weeks. But you've been asking God to answer you all this time. He's here now. Don't go quiet. In verses 6 and 7, then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. We have to stop making God repeat himself. So God goes in on him again. But this time, Job's response is different. He repents for his previous behaviors. Then God turns to the other friends. They've been quiet for a while now. He speaks directly to Eliphaz, which makes sense considering he was the one with the most to say out of the three unwise men. In verses 7 through 9, after the Lord had said these things to Job, he said to Eliphaz the Temanite, I am angry with you and your two friends, because you have not spoken the truth about me as my servant Job has. He doesn't mention Elihu, because Elihu spoke the truth. So now take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job and sacrifice a burnt offering for yourselves. My servant Job will pray for you, and I will accept his prayer and not deal with you according to your folly. You have not spoken the truth about me as my servant Job has. God's basically saying, you all better consider yourself blessed that Job's your friend. Verse 9, so Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite did what the Lord told them, and the Lord accepted Job's prayers. Now, I love a full circle moment. And when I read verse 8, I specifically thought of the friend Bildad and how he mentioned Job's children dying because of their sin, dismissing the fact that Job prayed and sacrificed offerings for his children on a regular. And now he, Bildad, has to bring his sacrifice to Job in order for God to accept it. Job would be the one to pray on behalf of not just his friends, but the ones that accused him. They were supposed to be there to comfort him or to save him, in a sense, from the depths of his misery. And Job ends up saving them from themselves. In that moment, God openly made Job the mediator for his friends. The very thing that he had been asking God for himself. Job's on a little Jesus-y, if you ask me. Now, when God gave me this text, it was at the beginning of verse 10, after Job prayed for his friends, that stopped me in my tracks. I've always heard the story of Job preached from the perspective of perseverance. Can God consider you? That type of stuff. And my answer would always be, yes, but no, but yes. You can, but don't. I don't want all that. But as I studied, I saw a lot of myself already in there. And I had to laugh because I guess he considered me anyway. But yet will I trust him? Because when he pinpointed verse 10, he showed me a perspective that I had not known before. Job's suffering wasn't just a test of endurance. It wasn't just to see if or how much he could take before he broke. But that's what the devil thought it was. But what the enemy plans for evil, we know that scripture. Now let's actually look at verse 10. After Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortune and gave him twice as much as he had before. And we always get excited about that. God gave him twice as much as he lost. But let's not miss that it was only after he prayed for his friends that it was all restored. Why would that matter? This question came to me after I was pretty much done writing the sermon. And let's put a pin in there. Because also at the time, yesterday morning, I still didn't understand why the dialogue had to be as long as it was. I still strongly felt like they talked too much. In the book of Proverbs, it emphasizes that there's wisdom in silence. So why did they need to talk as much as they did? Or why they need to document it all? And God told me they had to keep talking. He had to get them to expose themselves, along with every weak, self-absorbed, and incorrect thought that they had about him. Why? So that he can correct and restore them. And how does God restore them? Through Job. Back in the beginning of the book, it looks as though God is letting the devil have his way. But the story of Job is literally Genesis 50 and 20 in action. And I'm sorry I didn't have this as a slide. God gave this to me about 2 hours ago. Genesis 50 and chapter 50, verse 20 says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish now what is being done, the saving of many lives. The devil was permitted to touch one man, just Job, only one afflicted. But through one man's affliction came multiple friends' restoration. Then God told me to look at my phone. He reminded me of some notes that I had written back at 4:12 a.m. the morning after he had given me the text, back in the beginning of the year. And it ties up this perspective. These friends came thinking that Job needed them. but they needed Job and his affliction. He was the only man righteous enough to carry that affliction on a road paved with false accusations and slander from his loved ones and still appear almost faultless before God. Job sounded like another J-man I knew. Job's affliction had to last a little while, just like how their conversation had to last a little while in order for God's restorative power to take full effect. These friends were supposed to be there as almost a saving grace for Job, but God used Job and his affliction to save his friends. 4 years ago, I spoke about a group of men who weren't living under law, yet who did a big work to get their friend to Jesus, and Jesus healed the man, but not because of the work that they did, but because of the faith put behind their works. And tonight, you've heard about a man whose friends were certain within themselves that his healing would come through works. Yet it was only Job's faithfulness that restored his friends. So back to that question, why was it only after Job prayed for his friends that all was restored? Because that was the purpose all along. Job, the mediator. Job's test wasn't even about him. Just like the paralyzed man's friends, the scripture talks about how they had to press their way through the crowd. They climbed up on a roof. They did all that, and their visit to Jesus wasn't even about them. Which friend are you? Thank you.
You are welcome here. Come feel the atmosphere. Welcome home to Shekinah.